Rear Window, like many Hitchcock movies, captures the magnetism of voyeurism. You know, Hitchcock, he knew his audience very well. He knew they were coming to his movies as voyeurs. And there is a sick, twisted, guilty little pleasure that we as human beings have in watching something we're not supposed to be watching. That movie captures that feeling and packages it in a way that puts us on the just side of the lead character, played by Jimmy Stewart, where we're deciphering a crime. So it really just tapped into the voyeur in all of us. Twilight Zone is a huge undertaking, a huge project, and a daunting one. And I have just so much respect for Serling. I have so much respect for the original series. The reason we decided to take it on was because we felt like the world needed it. Honestly, what Serling did with that original series was he pointed things out through allegory, through story. He pointed things out about our society. He sparked discussion. He allowed us to realize things about ourselves through the entertainment genre, and he did it on television. We are at a time right now where I hear maybe once a day, it feels like we are in the Twilight Zone. And so it felt like it was time. Another one of the greatest of all time, Psycho. Just a crazy movie. I love to think about what it must have been like in the moment when some of these movies came out, because it's hard in retrospect to really understand. You know, we've seen all the films that have been inspired by these movies. We've seen all of the serial killer movies that have happened since Psycho. When that movie came out, it completely changed the way people viewed cinema, and it was an enormous success, but at the same time, I think went into a darker place in the human psyche than had ever been attempted before. Also, you know, Hitchcock, a master of many things, but you know, Psycho was a pinnacle film in the artistry of subverting an audience's expectations. And what he did with the Janet Leigh character, Marion Crane, was he introduced you to a protagonist and then just killed her 40 minutes into the movie. No one saw that coming, and it just, I don't even know if anyone's pulled that off yet, since. He pulled the rug out of the entire idea of what it means to tell a story. Night of the Living Dead, total game changer, right? We've got a black protagonist, and we've got a movie that is in itself an allegory for race and racial discussion, and it's mad early. I think Get Out came out probably like 50 years after Night of the Living Dead. My favorite thing about this movie is that it's about something important, it's about something poignant, without being about it. All of a sudden, a bunch of dead bodies start rising from their graves and attack the country. They attack a house. And what you have is a black man and a white woman end up in a house, and you see this little microcosm for this racial dynamic where she's in shock, but you don't quite know where the shock of being attacked by zombies or the shock of being in this house with this black dude who just is all business drops off and picks up. And then, of course, one of the most crushing endings of all time that really just sort of left an impact. And, you know, for that movie alone, Romero just became an absolute horror icon. That movie really turned the idea of a zombie into like a household monster name. Halloween is probably the greatest slasher film of all time, John Carpenter's masterpiece. And then, you know, I really get into, you know, what I call the supernatural killer franchise movies. So, you know, I'm an 80s kid, so Nightmare on Elm Street, Child's Plays, Candyman. These movies that are about a killer that has special powers. There's something about that dynamic of bringing in that sort of dark, magical element that is sort of a release. It brings it to this realm of the imagination, and it's not as depressing as like it's just a traditional like slasher where a dude's just killing people and killing people. We begin to see the world through the eyes of the killers, which is a really pretty grim idea, but obviously served some sort of social purpose. When we got to the 80s and the supernatural killers and like Freddy's out there killing, you know, people and you know, doing like a bit like, you know, dinner's served, you know, when you're doing the bit, he became like a surrogate for the audience in this weird way. And I feel like he tapped into some suppressed aggression, something that needed to get out, and it became this different kind of interactive experience where you start cheering and rooting for the killer, and the teenagers, you know, become less and less likable in their portrayal. So it was a really dark, twisted time. Really disturbed me as a kid, but. You know, anything that resonates, anything that works in the horror genre, I think it's doing it because of some deep-seated societal reasons. Then, you know, Candyman came along, which is a masterpiece, and one of the things that it unlocked is what if the supernatural killer was a black man? That was a shift for me. In many ways, totally not okay, and in many ways, it was this weird, arrival to something that I was longing for. There's something about horror movies, especially when you talk about it in terms of the black audience, who really shows up for horror, and I think really appreciates horror. And you know, we'll yell at the screen, we will be interactive, but the films never really served us our identity, and people with black skin just didn't fare very well, it's just a kind of a confusing and unfortunate thing for me growing up, sort of being in love with horror movies, but also not feeling very well represented. So that was a complete game changer. One of the reasons I'm embarking on adding to the mythology of Candyman. Blair Witch Project was a game changer. You know, that was just a study in how scary you can make a movie where it's basically nothing happens. And a masterpiece of anticipation and tension. I love the part of a horror movie where we're living with the terror of what's to come. That's when the audience has the ability to create their own nightmares in their head and go through all those scenarios. Sixth Sense, I mean, that movie scared the shit out of me. I have so much respect for M. Night for just bringing such an elevated contribution to the horror genre. One of the ways it's particularly special is, you know, the acting. You know, it is a horror, but it's also a drama. The performances in that movie are just incredible. Like Toni Collette's scene at the end of that movie will just make you cry when she's in the car with Haley Joel Osment and he sees the grandma outside the door. Like, that makes me cry every time. And then, you know, of course, there's that amazing twist that everybody knows now. Spoiler alert, there's a twist at the end of The Sixth Sense. I think what people are gonna find in us is that, you know, much like in Get Out, I'm inspired by many different subgenres of horror, and you know, I really tried to make something that incorporates what I love about those and sort of steps into its own new subgenre.